If you've made it this far, congratulations and thank you for sticking with it. In this video, we'll be adding materials and textures to the MacBook and setting up some lighting. I've added a few more details to the model and added a ground plane, which doesn't really make any difference. But if you'd like to use the same model, you can download it for free from my website, link in the description. Throughout this tutorial, we've been working in solid viewport mode, which displays the model with basic lighting and no textures. This mode helps us to focus on form, silhouette, and topology without distraction of material or lighting. I'm just going to switch to the shading workspace. There's nothing fancy about it. It's just split into 6 areas. 2 viewports at the top, a UV and shader editor on the bottom, and just like before, an outliner and properties editor on the right. If we click this icon here, we enter rendered viewport mode. This shows our scene with full lighting, materials, and effects using the selected render engine, giving us a real-time preview of the final render. We'll be using the Cycles render engine, which we can set in the renders property panel. In the shader editor, make sure the shader type is set to world, and then press this new button. The shader editor uses a node-based visual system where you connect modular blocks, each representing data, maths, texture, or materials to craft complex, customizable shaders in a non-linear workflow. In the shader editor, press Shift A and then go down to Input and then RGB to add an RGB node. Then connect the color output to the color input of the background. And now this color data flows into the background, which then flows into the world output node. Let's light up the scene using a HDRI. You can delete this node, press Shift A and go to Textures, Environment Texture. Click open and navigate to your HDRI image. Make sure to connect the image to the background node. And now this image is lighting up the scene. It flows into the background node at a strength of 1 and from there into the world output. Lowering this strength will make the light dimmer. Increasing it makes it brighter and more washed out. Let's duplicate this background node, Shift A and add a mix shader. Now plug this node into this input and this node into this one, and then a result of that into the world output node. This scene is now being lit by both nodes. With the factor set to 0.5, they contribute equally. Sliding the factor to 0 uses only the top shader and 1 uses only the bottom. Let's add a light path and connect the camera ray into the factor. Then let's switch these two around. Now only the bottom node will be visible to the camera, while everything else will be lit by the top node. Now let's switch the shader type to object. Select the main base object, select material properties. Notice the new button in both the shader editor and material properties tab. This means that the object currently has no materials assigned. Clicking on this or this drop down, we'll see that there are no materials in this scene. Click new to create our first material. There are many ways to create materials in Blender, and the topic is quite deep and far beyond the scope of this tutorial, so I'll keep things simple. All the materials that we'll be making will be based on this node, the principal BSDF. Let's rename this to main shell, increase the metallic to 1 and adjust the base color to something a little bit darker. If we just zoom in and adjust the roughness, we can make it more or less reflective. Let's set that to something like 0.35. Next, let's select the speaker holes, create a new material, set the color to black, roughness to 1 and diffuse roughness to 1 as well. And let's rename that to speaker holes. Select the trackpad, click on the drop down and select the main shell material. If you want to make adjustments to this, then we'll also be making adjustments to everything else. So if I just undo that, this little number here tells me how many objects are using this material. If I click on this number, it changes the material name and makes it unique. So now if I adjust the parameters, it only changes this object. Let's zoom in here and select the rubber seal. New, rename it to rubber seal. Just going to increase the roughness to something like 0.9, make it slightly darker than the main shell. I'm going to select this bezel down here, apply the main shell material to that, make it unique by pressing this number. Going to rename that to screen bezel. Going to adjust the metallic to 0 and the roughness to 0.2 and make it a little bit darker. Going to apply that same material to this other bezel. I'm just going to select the trackpad and rename that material to trackpad. For the ground plane, I'm just going to open up another shader editor, set this one to world, zoom in on this background color, then with the ground plane still selected, click new, rename that to ground plane. I'm going to delete the BSDF node, Shift A and add an ambient occlusion node and also a color ramp. I'm going to plug the color into factor and then this color into surface. Then I'm going to select this color picker and I'm going to drag the background color into here. Anything that is within close proximity to this is casting a shadow, and then everything else is that color, which in this particular occasion happens to be the background, and hence you don't see the boundary between this plane and the background. So we can increase the strength of the ambient occlusion by just dragging this black color over to the right, or we can change the ambient occlusion color to something else if we want, but we don't want. Now we're going to add an image on the screen, but before we can do that, we need to unwrap the geometry. So I'm going to go in front view in orthographic view. I'm going to go to edit mode, select all, hit U and press project from view. Now if you look in our UV editor, this is the UV layout of this geometry. We don't need this shader editor anymore, so let's close that. Create a new material, rename this to screen. Let's navigate to the image that we want on the screen. Let's plug that into the color. Let's zoom out in the UV editor. We'll notice that the proportions have changed. So we're just going to go in front view again, select all, U, project from view, and it fixes it. So now if we select all in here and scale up and adjust the UV map, if we click on the overlays button, we can see the results a little bit better. Let's expand emission and plug the image into color and increase the strength to 0.5. And now the image will also be emitting light. So if we were to go into our world editor and unplug the lighting, the screen will be emitting light. So go back into object editor, unplug that, there is no light. It's interesting that the ground plane is emitting light. If I hide that, you don't see anything. Let's go to the back of the laptop, select lid main and apply the main shell material to it. We can also use an image as an alpha channel or factor between two materials. In this viewport, let's go to the back orthographic view and zoom in a little bit. With the lid main still selected, let's go to edit mode, face select, select these two faces, go to object data properties, maximize UV maps, click on this plus icon and rename this to logo. Let's add an image texture here. Let's add a UV map node. In this drop down, select logo, open and navigate to an image. With these two faces still selected, let's not forget to unwrap UV. So U, then project from view. Then let's plug this into here, move that along. Add a mix shader, plug the color into factor, duplicate the BSDF, plug one of them into the bottom and one into the top, and this output into the material output. Now I'm going to temporarily change this color, select all and scale up and move it over a little bit like this. This image is being used as a factor between these two shaders, but only in the areas that have got a UV map named logo. That's why it's not making any difference over on this side. So let's just drag this color up in here. And all I wanted to do is make the logo shiny. So you'll also notice that we can only project on one half of this lid. And that's because we only have access to the UVs on one side. And that's because it uses a mirror modifier. So the workaround to that is, if you expand that and expand data in the mirror modifier and click on mirror U, let's just zoom in here. If we just select the UVs, select all and adjust them until they match. And let's change repeat to clip. I'm happy with the X positioning of this UV map. So I'm going to select that vertex, Alt S and cursor to selected. Make sure pivot point is set to 2D cursor. Select all. I can scale the logo and it stays intact. Let's select the hinges. Let's make the outer ones the same material as the main shell. And the inner one, we'll use the screen bezel. Rubber seal looks a little bit too light. So let's just make it a bit darker. What's happened to our screen? Oh, we've detached it. So we will have a similar issue with the keys as we did with the back. Because most of these are generated by modifiers, there is no access to their UV maps. So what we're going to do here instead, this empty is being used to project this image onto anything which has this material on it. So in this case, if I move this empty around, it will move the material on anything that's using it, which is all of those keys. So if I just undo that, and the image that I'm using for that is just the same material that we use for the reference for the top image, which is that. So the empty and the image and the coordinates are these three nodes. Then the image is fed into this color ramp. If I just isolate that, and this color ramp is reducing the gradient between black and white. So we've just got mainly black and white data, and then that is used as a factor between this emissive node and this image node. However, when I had it just like that, when I turned the emission to off, it caused this. So what I did then is I put the result of that into another mix node and then fed the image into the other node. And now when I adjust the factor, it will go from image to this emission node. So now I can increase this emission to 100 or turn it off. Then as long as I reduce that to 0, this will go back to non-emissive. And that brings us to the end of this tutorial series. If anything wasn't clear or you just want to explore this complete file, then please go ahead and download it for free from my website. The file also includes the custom HDRI I made, which you're welcome to use in your own projects. Thank you again for watching, and I hope you enjoyed it and found something valuable along the way.